All right. Hi, everyone. I hope you guys are doing well. My name is Alper. If you haven't seen me before, I'm the Education Content Manager for this year's CodeDay Labs. I'm happy to welcome Katerina Hanson, and she will be talking to you guys about the behavioral interview side of interviews in the tech field and the CS field, and some helpful tips for this. If you'd like to introduce yourself a little more, Katerina, that would be great.
Yeah, sure. Um, okay, well, I am a senior engineering manager at a startup called Doma. We actually just went public today or Wednesday. Today's Friday. So we got listed on Wednesday on the New York Stock Exchange, and that was very exciting for the whole company. I have over 3 years in management now, and a little over 7 years in software. I've been in a number of different Silicon Valley startups. I am a self-taught software engineer. I switched to software engineering in 2014. And in that time, I've done 5 job hunts for myself. I've held hundreds of interviews and probably read thousands of resumes, as startups are known to hire a lot of engineers. And we go on recruiting a lot. So anyway, I have definitely heard, especially from newer engineers, like, I passed the technical. Isn't that what matters? And it is not 100% what matters. It's probably only about 50 or 60%. I have definitely seen people who, were excellent engineers who didn't manage to pass the behavioral interviews. And a lot of the best companies, especially now, they're coming to the realization that on a day-to-day basis, behavior is super important, and how somebody works with other people can make or break a team. And if somebody is not able to work well with other people, then you're probably going to have to end up, walking them out the door at some point later. And we definitely want to avoid that however we can up front. So at the same time, I feel like a lot of people, especially more junior engineers kind of just entering the field, don't have a good understanding of what is expected for them in the behavioral interview, and that can make it more difficult for them to put their best foot forward. So even if they are very awesome, they can end up getting passed on for a lot of companies that would have liked to have them. So I wanted to go over some of the basics here and some tips. So what are we really looking for in the behavioral interview? We've already decided perhaps that you can do the technical part. You can program, your algorithms, your data structures, you can design a database. All of that is good. You may have even had a portfolio, which is really great at showing what your abilities are. But we want to make sure that you can work well with others, because engineering in a company level really is a team sport. You have to work well with other people. You're going to be talking to customers, you're going to be talking to product, you might be talking with customer service, you might be talking with people that I report to as your manager. So I need to make sure that you can work well with the other people at the company. We're looking for the ability to learn and change your behavior in response to a situation that may not have gone as well as you would have liked. We definitely want people who are respectful, because you are a representative for the team, for the company, and the ability to be communicative. One of the things that I often see with new engineers is that they might think of their boss as like, oh, they're busy, I won't bother them. And that is literally my job, is to be bothered by people. So I need people who, if they're getting stuck, if they have questions, they're going to ask those questions. They're going to say, hey, I'm stuck on this. Hey, this doesn't make sense. And we can go to the right person and work it out with them. So the willingness to communicate when you're having trouble, because everybody has trouble, like their entire career, you're going to get stuck on something or another, and you're going to have to go talk to people. So we need to see a lot of that willingness. One thing about behavioral interviews, I did want to discuss some watchouts. They can, at certain companies, just be filled with bias. They can use culture fitness as an excuse to reject pretty much anybody. But the best companies, they're going to have guards against this. They're going to be asking everybody the same questions. The questions are going to be relevant to the job, to the skills that you need for the job. And they're oftentimes going to ask, have more than one person ask the same question, or have more than one person in the room at the same time, so that they know that one person isn't being, overly biased for some reasons. Now, smaller, younger, newer, more disorganized companies, they may not have this. They may not have trained their interviewers well. So if you do run into a company where they're asking questions that you don't think are relevant, just politely decline to answer those questions. You do not necessarily have to answer every question. For example, I had one place that I interviewed at asked me if I had children, and I just said, that is not something that I am going to answer in this interview. And it was, a job that I didn't take, but it also was, fine for me to just say, I don't need to answer that question. It's basically none of your business. So these are a short list of just straight up illegal questions. They shouldn't be asking you age, birthplace, country of origin or citizenship in any of the interviews, no disability, nothing about your gender, marital status, family, race, color, ethnicity, or religion. These are all off the table. You don't have to answer these. And you should call them out, and you should tell your HR contact that they're asking you these questions. All right, so why do we do these? Past performance is really a great indicator for future performance for people, not stocks. But when you can get somebody to explain something that they did versus what they would do, you're going to get more accurate information from when somebody says, I did this, I have done this. So less experienced interviews may also ask hypotheticals, but you should almost always try to answer with a situational response. I did this. There was that time when is much stronger answer than, oh, if I was in that situation, I would just do this. There's usually like a short list of categories that these questions come in, because there's really only a finite number of things that you can ask people about. So if you get together 5 or 6 stories of experiences that you have had in the different not in each of the different categories, but total across the different categories, you'll probably be able to answer any question that they throw out at you. Don't worry about repeating yourself in between interviews. Generally, they'll expect a certain amount of repetition, and sometimes they're even like building that in so that more than one person can hear the same story and get perspective on that story. Just keep it consistent. So yeah, story time. So here's my list of stories. We usually start these with, tell me about a time when, and the general category is you did something great. Tell me about a time when you had a success, when you did something you were proud of. This answer can be very technical. It can be, I built this great service and this is what, it did. I added a feature to this other service and it improved things by X. It's really an opportunity to highlight your strengths and problem solving skills. The second category is when you had difficulty. And there's probably a lot of questions that can come out of, like sometime when you overcame a challenge. Everything went wrong and you had to work late and fix it. There's a really tricky bug and it took a while to find. You had to go back to documentation, something like, it was hard and you overcame. It's actually fine if the result wasn't great in these situations, because you can also say what you learned. And what you learned is always valid and actually a very positive thing, because it shows your ability to learn, your ability to grow, and your ability to adjust in the face of like difficulties. And the final one is times when other people made your life difficult. This could be clients, it could be internal customers, it could be coworkers or other students. And the questions we're really trying to get to is, how did you work with this difficult person? What did you do to persuade them to come over to your side? How, did you repair or build the relationships so that you could work with them longer term? All of these things are fantastic. And now, where do I get my stories from? Obviously, previous work experience is the best, but internships are fantastic. If you've done any internships, they usually have a lot of things that have gone wrong or well or both, and you've worked with a number of people. Any type of volunteering efforts is also fair game. School projects is fine, particularly ones where you've worked with several other people. And if you still can't think of something, life is okay for somebody who's very new to the industry. We're just looking for patterns and behavior and what you typically do when you're faced with a problem or a challenge or a difficult person, basically. So how to tell your story. My favorite acronym is CAR, and it's for context, action, result. And I know some people go with STAR, but I feel like that's too many letters. It's just a lot simpler for me to think of it as context, action, result, 3 distinct sections to my stories. So context, I don't know you. I may have read your resume. I might have like a little context, but I need to understand in this particular situation, what were you doing? Where were you? And it really is the 5 W's. Who was involved? What was the goal of whatever the problem was, the project was? When did it happen is really good context. Was it at the last job that you were at? Was it in school? Was it 3 years ago? Where were you? What company were you at? Were you in school? What team were you on? And why were you doing the thing? Is all very relevant information and gives me enough understanding to like put myself in the position of like, okay, I know what the issue was here. I know the general landscape. The second part is really action. And we are talking about, what did you do? A lot of times people will come in and they will say, we did this, we did that, we searched the logs, we pushed a hotfix. And it may be that it was actually you, like you searched the logs. And so you should say, I saw the error, I searched the logs, I notified the other people, I made a hotfix and I put it through the deployment and it went live. And so saying I and taking ownership for the actions that you did is a very important part of the behavioral interview, because we can't suss out what part you did, what part other people did. And a lot of times we'll just err on the side of assuming that you are watching while other people did things. And then the result. How did it turn out? It's always nice to close out a story with what happened afterwards. If it was a success, it fixed the problem, we were able to save time, we were able to save money, we were able to increase the users on the platform. All of that is fantastic. Tell me that you made an impact. If it was a failure, it is also fine. Like, it turns out we fixed the hotfix and that made an even bigger problem. And we learned not to push hotfixes through without testing it in a sandbox environment first. That is a valuable learning experience. And it is absolutely fine to admit that it didn't work, but you learned something from it. That being said, in your interviews, please don't take up all the time on one question. I've definitely had people go on, just run on, and we can't get to all of the questions that we have. We usually have 4 to 5 questions that we're aiming to get to, and we'll let you talk, because the more you talk, the more red flags we might see. So we do get worried, but it's better to not take up all the time on the question. Don't badmouth people or previous companies. You may have had a terrible culture, but it's important that you get to a sense of mindset where you're not upset about the fact that you had to work at a place with a bad company or a bad culture or a terrible boss. Having the maturity and empathy to be able to say, okay, yes, these people, they may have been terrible, but they were probably doing the best job that they could in the space that they had. I don't know these people, so coming across to me with complaints and negativity makes me think that you're going to do the same thing here. So whatever situations you may have been in before, do your best to get yourself to the point where you can say, okay, well, I learned from it, I know what to avoid in my next job, but I'm not going to harp on it to people in an interview. Please don't be offensive or rude to the interviewer. That is the one thing that will get you probably removed from the interview almost immediately. And those are my basic don'ts. In terms of things to do, though, do be professional and positive. Take a moment to think and consider your answer after somebody asks a question. You can take a pause, you can think, and then take the time to make sure that the story that you're about to tell matches the question that was asked. A lot of times I will have people give me an answer, like a story to one of my questions, which would have been a great answer for another question I was about to ask. And so I'll be able to use that for some other question, but I still won't have an answer to the first question, which is something that I was looking for. When you do tell your story, context, action, result, and then stop. That gives your interviewer the cue that they can either ask more questions about the story and the situation you were just in, or if they got enough information from it, they'll ask you another question. And definitely let the interviewer ask questions. Do not talk over them. Give them a pause, say your bit, give them a pause, let them ask you questions. Be prepared to answer questions about the story that you just told. So they may go into deeper detail in something that you said, but that's fine. Just answer those questions and then again, stop. Once you get to the end, it is well within your rights to ask questions of your own. Interviews should be two-way. You should be evaluating whatever company you're going to just as much as they are evaluating you. You need to make sure that it is a place that you actually want to work. Quite often, especially in startups, you don't know a whole lot about the company before you start interviewing for them. So it's important to do some research and have some questions available for them. It shows that you're interested and that you understand what it is you're looking for so that you can get a good match. In cases of an emergency, ask for a break. If it's just something that, oh, I need to go to the restroom, it is fine to ask for a break. I want to make sure you know that if you have an emergency, you can usually contact your HR rep to reschedule interviews. And that's like, I'm sick, or something happened, or something else happened, and I just need to reschedule. Feel free to reschedule. They probably won't even necessarily notice with all of the meetings that we have that, oh, this person rescheduled. It's like, oh, it'll be fine, I promise. If your internet connection is bad, and we see this a lot these days, ask if you can change to a phone call in the meantime. Definitely ask and make sure that the interviewer can hear you and understand you, and that you can understand them. If not, it is also okay to say, I think we might have to reschedule this, and then work to reschedule the interview. And if there's too much noise, it might also be a good time to reschedule. I had one interviewee who had unexpected construction going on outside their window, and it was just impossible to hear them. And we were able to reschedule to a time when the construction wasn't happening, and that was fine. If we had tried to keep going with all of the noise that was going on, we wouldn't have been able to hear, and it probably would not have resulted as positively. And that is my presentation on the behavioral interview. Does anybody have any questions? I'm available for questions.
Thank you so much, Katerina, for the presentation. Yeah, if anyone has any questions at all, please write it in the Q&A.
And I can take questions on other things too.
Yeah, feel free to ask. So this is something I ask some of our other career talks speakers. Out of all the tips that you gave, maybe there's some that you haven't given, but above all else, in a behavioral interview, what would you suggest that someone has to do above anything else?
So I think being professional, I think having the professionalism aspect is very important, in the sense of being prepared, having considered your own experiences, doing your best to answer the questions, and doing it in such a way that just really puts your best foot forward with the experience that you have. Having that interest, showing that potential is a lot of what we're looking for.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. Someone in the chat asked, what resources or books do you recommend to use to prepare for the behavioral interview?
I don't think I have any books off the top of my head. There's definitely, I have seen a lot of just Googling behavioral interview questions for software engineers. I don't necessarily agree with all of the things that I've seen there. But yeah, it tends to be somewhat subjective.
Thank you. Robinson is asking, what are some go-to questions you have for interviewers?
So questions that for interviewers to ask the company? No, for interviewees. No, okay, for interviewers. What are some of the questions that interviewers will ask you?
Robinson, if you'd like to give a clarification in the Q&A, that'd be great.
Okay. I can kind of answer. I mean, so questions that they're going to ask you are definitely like, tell me about a time questions. Tell me about a time when you had to work with somebody. Once they open the floor to you, I usually tailor my questions to the person that I'm talking to. So I'm typically prepared to talk to either engineers, in which case I'm going to ask them a lot of technical questions about, their platform, their IDEs, whether or not they have separate development environments, what databases they're using, what version control they're using, and just kind of ticking off the list of technical things that I, am hoping that they have in place already. I may also ask them how easy it is to change those things, if it is particularly something that I don't like, or if there's things that I see are missing, how easy is it to say, add a logging system if they don't have, centralized logging. So those are typically questions that I will save specifically for the engineers. For product people, if I'm in the room with a product person, I will ask them questions about how they work with engineering. How do you take product requirements and turn it into a feature? What does that process look like? How do you pair with engineering? If engineering says, oh, the thing that you're asking for is going to be, it's going to take a long time, it's going to be expensive. Do they have the ability to go back to product and negotiate with them, change it, and will product be likely to adjust for things like that? Usually they're aiming to be a partner, so engineers will have a say when it comes to product designs. And I'll probably also ask them about how projects are estimated. I'll be looking for things like, I want engineering to have some input into the estimation process. Because until engineering gets it, you don't really know what's going to be involved. And usually engineers have to look at it for a period of time, especially on systems that are like legacy. You might have to do some research. So I'll be looking for just a really collaborative experience with that. For managers, I'm looking more for what their expectations are for the role, where they think the company is going, what types of projects they're going to have, and I'm looking for a general ability to work with them, because I do think that working with your managers can be like the best or the most difficult thing for your career. And those are usually the people that I'm talking to as an engineer. How long does the behavioral and technical interview take? Usually I would say behavioral interviews are about an hour. They may be as little as 30 minutes. You may have them have these kinds of situational questions done several times with several different people. So there may be, like an engineer and a product person in the room for the behavioral interview, and that might take a while, but then you might have another interview with the hiring manager to make sure that they can also work with you and you can ask questions there, and they might do something shorter, but it's still probably going to be like situational questions for you too. So I would consider that also something of a behavioral interview. Many companies will work them in several sessions, but always ask your HR contact upfront what the interviews are going to look like, what the panels are going to involve.
Thank you. We have one more by Robinson. What difficulties did you encounter being self-taught?
Um, So I came from a STEM background. I was a chemical engineer before I switched to software engineering. So I had kind of been using software as a tool. I hadn't actually gone to the length of learning a whole language. When I did, I had to take a pretty big role cut in that, like, I went from being a principal and chemical engineer to being a junior software engineer. And it was a little difficult at the beginning, I think, to recognize which parts of my skills translated um, to my new role as a software engineer. And there were a lot of them that I was able to leverage eventually and work my way up. So kind of having that was very compressed. So it took me some effort to like get the respect that I thought I deserved. But I wouldn't say that I was like any worse off for not having gone to like a college. And they didn't really have boot camps at the time. So I did a lot of reading. I really did dive into like fundamentals. And so I was just knowledge-wise pretty like pretty even and pretty equal with the other engineers that I was working with.
Thank you. If we have any more questions, please feel free to ask in the chat.
No more questions?
Yeah, I guess not. Oh, we do have one.
I
May is
mean,
asking, what are the things in chemical engineering that translated into software engineering that you just talked about?
yeah. So I had done a lot of work in project management as a chemical engineer. Chemical engineering was a lot slower than software, but we were still definitely gathering requirements, talking to customers, um, coordinating between teams, being communicative with managers on issues and problems, managing change. I would say that all of that was directly applicable to software in one way or another. Chem-E tended more towards a waterfall method, where you do a lot of design up front, basically all of the design up front, as much design as you can, you push it forward because it's cheaper to do changes before you've actually purchased things. But software tends to have more of an agile bent on like a week to week basis. But at the end of the day, there's still definitely periods where you need to do upfront design. If you know, like you're evaluating a couple of different vendors for a service, you might have to go out and, you know, get bids and compare and make sure you're looking apples to apples, or decide whether or not a vendor is even possible because they have some restrictions or rate limits. And so kind of paying attention to that process. I was able to be really effective at doing those types of projects, which definitely helped in the career and helped with the move to management eventually.
Thank you. Robinson is asking, is there any tips you have for someone who wants to enter software engineering prior to graduation?
So internships are huge. If you can get an internship somewhere, that is like such good experience, I think, and it gives you those types of stories. It gives you the type of work experience. A lot of times it helps with like just work ethic, understanding what's required from you on a day-to-day basis when you're in the field. If not a straight up internship, then volunteering efforts are very good. It doesn't have to necessarily even be very long. I've seen a lot of people do like hack days. And there's a series of meetups and just events that they'll usually hold every year before, where you can just like volunteer and there's like a problem and you're working together with total strangers to try to solve it. Those would make some good experience stories. And then conferences are also a really good way to get some information on the industry. So I'd recommend, particularly now, it's pretty easy to join over Zoom for a lot of conferences, and understand where the field is, where it's going, and ask questions of people.
Thank you. How do you prepare for interview day? How do you deal with your nervousness or not feeling intimidated by all of the people you need to meet on the day of the interview?
So what I do is I lower the stakes. I will interview for a whole bunch of different companies, some of which I am probably not going to actually take the job, even if they offered it to me. But I'll do basically practice interviews with with companies that I'm, not terribly interested in, but if they impress me, then maybe. And so once you get a few of those under your belt, even if they turn around and say no, it's like, okay, I've gotten used to a certain amount of rejection, but it's fine because I'm going to just, move on. It wasn't a good fit. And so like I practice. I know my husband does not do the same thing. He tends to find people in his network that work at companies that he wants to work at, and then he gets them to refer him, which is also another really good way of like getting your foot in the door. I would say in that case, he probably ends up with higher stakes, but he practices more for the particular interview. And so, yeah, he'll spend a good amount of time practicing, or even, like having somebody else ask him questions and quiz him.
Thank you. Is it possible for non-traditional people that do not have internships to get software engineering jobs? How do they demonstrate they have software engineering experience?
It is definitely possible. I personally, like when I was switching from chemical engineering to software, I did projects. I basically started doing tutorials when I was first starting. And as I was going through my tutorials, I would post them all to GitHub and make them publicly available. And then I started a project, and I had an open source project that I was working on that was a PDF writer, because I had a problem that I needed PDFs for, and the writers that existed didn't really work. And so I built myself a PDF writer, and I posted it to GitHub. And it wasn't finished. It was only about half complete, but I decided that I was doing well enough that I could probably go get a junior engineer job. And I didn't go for like the giant companies. Instead, I asked around and I found like an itty bitty startup, who literally had two people working at it when I was there. One was the CEO, who was a salesperson, and the other one was a CTO who had been a senior engineer, and he was working with his friend, and they just needed another engineer to kind of take some of the load off of him. And he said, we can handle a junior engineer. And they wanted me to finish my open source project for them. And they said like that was a good way for me to like do something that was valuable for the company. They ended up using it in their code, which was very cool. But yeah, I ended up finishing my open source project that they paid me to finish it, and then we used it in the product, and that was just excellent experience. So yeah, I would definitely suggest building a portfolio of things that you developed yourself. Typically, you don't necessarily want to start from something that is already too built up, but like start from as scratch as you can, and then you can point to that and say, I built this and I know this, and being able to answer those conceptual questions are really important. So
Thank you. If anyone else has any other questions, we have about 15 more minutes for Q&A. So please feel free to ask. We'll give it like a minute, and if not, I think that will be the end. So Katerina, how do you actually, there's another question. Let me think of how I was going to ask my question, but
sure.
May
How
is
do
asking
you
how to get job referrals.
job referrals? So referrals, I would say usually having somebody in your network who knows somebody who has a job. Like you go out to your network and you have to build your network to start. So having, friends or people who have a large network and who can ask on your behalf usually helps. But just start telling people that you're looking for a job in software. Like everybody I'm looking for a job in software. Do you know anybody who's hiring junior engineers? Do you know anybody who might, hire a junior engineer? I would say if you're looking for very small startups, AngelList is a good place to go looking. But even once you find it, finding somebody who knows somebody who works at the company is going to get you that job referral. A lot of companies do have referral bonuses. So even if you completely cold call somebody, if you know that they are hiring junior engineers, and they may get a bonus. And so they have a little bit of incentive to refer people if you look like a reasonable candidate. So just, go to your network, build your network, going to meetups and volunteering events or conferences and getting people's LinkedIn will oftentimes help with that, and just ping them. As a more senior person in software engineering, I'm always looking for I'm looking for people that I can help. It is something that I want to do. I want to get particularly more women into the field. And one of the ways that I can do that is by using my network to try to help people, find their first jobs or find a connection who can help them find a job that they would want.
Thank you. So what I was going to ask was, how do you, before you were talking about the interview is two-sided. So while they're evaluating you, you're evaluating the company. So what are some points that you'd recommend people look out for to basically have thinking points about being like, oh, is this company right for me? Is this workspace right for me? What would you say for that?
Yeah. So I understand that, especially for a brand new engineer who is very new to the field, they might not have the options available for them. That once you're more established, you can move and you can go find something that really fits. So I would be looking for at least the very basic things that are going to set you up for success. And that is looking for people who can mentor you. You do not want to be siloed where you are the only engineer on a team without anybody more senior than you. You want to be learning from more senior engineers, and you want those senior engineers to have the time and the interest in bringing you up to speed. You want to make sure that the environment you're in is going to set you up for being able to test code in a safe space before pushing it to production. So if they don't have a reasonable test environment, if they don't use a test environment, if they do tests in production, that could be setting you up for some like serious failures, and I would try to avoid those companies. So I would ask them, you know, if they have test environments, if they have version control, because if they don't even have version control, then that's not a job you want as a more junior engineer. You want to make sure, you know, that they have the systems in place that you can read logs, that, you know, they have a process in place for onboarding, that they use documentation. And you want a general willingness for people to answer questions. So like by asking them a whole bunch of questions, you can kind of tell whether or not they're willing to answer your questions later and whether or not they have the patience.
Thank you so much. If we don't have any other questions, I believe that will be the end.
All right.
Okay. Thank you so much again, Katerina, for your presentation, for all the helpful tips, and for all of your insightful answers to everyone's questions.
Oh, yeah, no, thank you.
Thank you so much. I really hope it was useful, and I know it was useful to all of the audience members and myself too. I hope you have a great day. I hope everyone else has a great day too.
I hope so. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.